Excellent. Well, thank you for this opportunity to introduce Eve Kaplan, a Fieldstone student who really didn't need me as a mentor. She came into the Get Magic program having had already been an intern for the Plastics Pollution Coalition, had been an advisor for the PAD project, and had written articles and been a co-editor of Girl Talk magazine. Like, she's accomplished. And we had a great time learning about legislation, the legislative process, how to be an advocate for all of the STEM work that you're passionate about. And I'm sure you're going to love her presentation. Congratulations to Eve, and thanks for letting me be your mentor.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Eve. I go to Fieldston School. And before I just start, I just want to say that the last 5 presentations were all super, super interesting. So I've learned a lot in the last hour. So that's been really awesome. Slide. So my mentor was Heidi, and she's from Fort Collins, Colorado. And she's a climate and sustainability manager for Larimer County. And she's originally from Southern West Virginia. She's a hiker, a world traveler, a rafter, a reader, a quilter. I too am a hiker, so we had a lot to talk about there. Slide. But so for my project, I knew I wanted to talk about something related to the environment in New York City, because that's kind of where we are. And so a little bit of personal background is that I grew up in California. And so growing up in California, every single year we used to have wildfires, and the houses of my neighbors, the houses of my family members, people I went to school with were burned down. And so for a long time, that was really normal. And so for me, moving to New York, where people don't talk about as much about air pollution here, because it's not like the world goes like gray every single October. But it's still so prevalent. And so that's kind of what I landed on, especially when I Googled, I did a lot of research, what were New York's biggest climate issues? And air pollution was near the top. And so I also wanted to look at how this impacted people differently. And this kind of goes a little bit back to Lila's project from earlier. But basically, 1/4 of children in low-income households suffer from asthma due to unhealthy air quality. And the causes of unhealthy air quality are pollutants from bus depots, major roadways, excessive mold, and infestation of rodents. Slide. So Harlem, for example, is one of the many neighborhoods that experiences the extreme effects of air pollution. And so Northern Manhattan is surrounded by 4 major bus depots, 3 major congested highways, 2 sewage treatment facilities, collection transfer station, diesel fuel Amtrak rail line, 2 DO depots, several parking lots, and then New York, New Jersey Port Authority bus station. And so if you compare this to where we are right now, look on the Upper East Side, or if you go to the West Village, you're not going to have this large number of bus depots. There basically aren't any downtown. And so for me, I kind of was really interested in seeing how air quality was so disproportionate, especially if you look at the South Bronx, or if you look at different parts of Long Island. But then where there's a high concentration of wealthy people, there's just going to be such better air quality. So slide. So I wanted to get involved somehow with the movement for better air quality in New York City. And so Leslie Vasquez is from South Bronx Unite. She's a clean air organizer, and she was testifying for a bill to reduce emissions from vehicles. So vehicles are one of the largest causes of air quality pollution, and especially vehicles that are transit ones. So this is buses, this is trains, but things that are sponsored by the city more specifically than just individual vehicles, and especially where those vehicles are being held. And so I had a Zoom with her, and I was able to get to know her. She's worked with Fieldston in the past. And so that's how I was able to meet her. And I was basically able to have a Zoom with her and talk to her about this bill that she was talking about. So slide. But basically, this is Senate Bill S2127. And so this is kind of showing you where it's at right now. So it was introduced, and then it goes to committee Senate. And to get a bill signed, and turned out to get a bill through in New York City is a very long, arduous process. So this is kind of where I came to see this bill. Slide. But basically, this is a little bit of language from the bill. The indirect source rule to regulate air quality emissions from vehicles associated with the operations of certain heavy distribution warehouse facilities to expedite attainment of federal air quality standards and to ensure compliance with state mandates under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later, but just right now, I want you to notice how vague this language is. I want you to notice how unscientific, how there's not really numbers attached, and how it's kind of inaccessible if you don't really know what some of these things are, like the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Slide. Oh wait, sorry, oh yeah. So then I wanted to,
You can go back.
all right, can I go to the next one?
Next one? Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to advocate for this bill. I wanted to help get it passed, help get it out of the place it was, because it had been holding for so long. So I formed a Fieldston board. I reached out to my community and I was able to get about 10 to 12 students who were able to write all of the senators who were co-sponsoring the bill who resided in their district. So I was able to get a bunch of different people from different areas. So like I live downtown, but a lot of my community members live uptown. I had a community member who lived right by our school in the Bronx. So that was really helpful. And we each wrote our district person who was on the bill and to advocate for it. And each of us kind of included a different reason. So I know that like sometimes it helps to like include a specific reason for why you were interested in the project. So we all sent out those emails. Slide. And so we all sent out these emails and none of us got responses. There was not one person who got a response. And it was many emails. And I had also sent multiple emails to a bunch of different Senate people, including my own district one. And so then I was like, well, what is this big kind of Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that this bill is under? I wanted to understand where this bill was coming from. And so New York State's Climate Act is among the most ambitious climate laws in the nation and requires New York to reduce economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030 and no less than 85% by 2050 from 1990 levels. So it was signed into law in 2019 by Andrew Cuomo, and the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act is the result of advocacy by dozens of grassroots organizations, including coalitions of over 180 environmental, community, and labor organizations. But this bill, this act was supposed to have a meeting right at the beginning of 2024. And we are now in May of 2024, and they have not met on it yet. And so part of why there's being so much stalling with bills that are related to this is because this one is not moving forward. And we're most likely not going to hit these big goals that they're talking about here. Slide. And so I got involved with another organization because I wanted to find out what we could have done better to get any responses about the bill that we never heard from after sending out all these emails. And so I talked to Delia Kundis. I definitely mispronounced that, but she came and spoke at Fieldston in our environmental week in the week of April. And so I'm a leader of the environmental club at Fieldston, and we were able to host her on campus. And she was able to talk to our student body a lot about advocacy. So I reached out to her and I set up a phone call, and here are some of the tips she gave me. So instead of sending all those emails, we should have been calling our representatives because they only really respond to calls. She talked about improvements to advocacy through pulling more constituents from new places. And she also talked about how the opposition right now for environmental acts in New York is holding a lot more power. So for example, she works for Brooklyn 350, which is an organization that advocates for pieces of legislation. And they had this bill that went super, super far. It was like a day away from being passed. And then the opposition was able to pull all these big oil companies from upstate New York. And all of those oil companies hold more money. They hold more organizational power. So like they were able to all come together really quickly and say, no, we don't want this. It's going to ruin all of this. You can't have this. And because the opposition right now is holding more power than rather individual constituents who have jobs. And, most of the people in these nonprofits also are working a day job. So like they can't just suddenly call all these people while big oil companies can. She talked about how it would be really helpful to involve labor unions like the Writers Guild or the Actors Guild to help out with the environmental work that New York organizations are trying to do, because simply by having like an actor's name attached to it, you might even hold more power. And she also talked about how passing a bill through the Senate or through the budget. And so I was looking at how to pass one through the Senate and that's how most states do it. But New York has this special thing where you can pass it through the budget. And that's really helpful because it's basically like hiding a bill. So like your constituents won't know you did it. And so if it's controversial or you feel like, oh my gosh, my constituents are not going to like that, I'm taking away their oil, you can pass it through the budget and people will be less likely to find you out. And it's a little bit easier. And then I learned that it takes 1 to 4 years on average to pass a bill, or 1 to 4 years kind of in that range, and 2 on average, which is really interesting to me because like a lot of these bills are very time sensitive. A lot of these bills pertain to now. They don't pertain to 4 years from now. Like I think the one that I was working on is something that New York should implement, today. They should have implemented it 10 years ago, but yet these bills take so long to pass. And then, slide. There are so many issues with our council. So they're inaccessible. It's really hard to get to any of your representatives who are the people that, you're supposed to kind of be hearing your voices. The website is like one of the worst formatted places of all time. So I know a lot of our coders in the room could definitely help them out because there's so many dead links. The website just doesn't work very well. And then they put up meetings for when the Senate's meeting. And I really wanted to go and testify because I watched some of these meetings online and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I want to go testify and talk about, all these topics, except the meeting's information comes out like a day before. It's like very long scheduling. There's a lack of specifics and it'll be like the meeting's in person and then won't give a location. So it's like, oh, awesome, but open to constituents. So that's really difficult. Slide. And then there's also 45,000 plus nonprofits in New York, but most of them aren't getting that much done because you really need a coalition of nonprofits to get a bill passed. And so there's a lack of communication. And then just going back to what everyone's been saying, I feel like we've talked a lot about science and activism. And what I really noticed is that there's this very inherent disconnect where the legislators are very, very disconnected from the scientists. So the legislators really don't understand what they're passing to some degree. Like these nonprofits, a lot of them have very good scientific backgrounds. A lot of them lack engineering backgrounds, but that's kind of a whole other thing. But they do really know what they're saying when they say, we want to reduce emissions, we want to reduce oil. They know what they're saying when they're talking about the statistics, but then they'll pass it with the legislators who don't know what it's saying. And so there's this disconnect between the legislators and the nonprofits. And that creates the disconnect between advocacy and science, which was like the whole kind of, my whole project was bridging activism and science. So yeah, that was definitely difficult. And then there's so many different agendas. So like all these small organizations have very different goals, and a lot of them are regional specific. So there's a lot of organizations that focus on the South Bronx or Harlem, or there's a lot of organizations that are like composting in the West Village. But it's really hard to get a large scale thing going because there's so many separations. So like there's just it's kind of a mess in the world of advocacy and environmentalism right now in New York. That was the conclusion. Slide. That's it. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
There's a lot of interest tonight in sustainability, and I'm curious what you think the benefits would be as an advocate of partnering with data.
Yeah, so the question was, there's a lot of interest tonight in sustainability, and what do I think the benefits are of partnering with some like more data sets? And I think that's definitely a really great question. Because like I did a lot at the beginning of my project, I was kind of science focused and I did a lot of research, but in this research, a lot of the data sets are very convoluted. So like I was looking at maps of like air pollution in New York for a really long time. And I looked at a bunch of different maps, and a lot of these maps have very different conclusions. So I feel like there's a lot that needs to be mainstreamed. So like if there was and I know a lot of people talk about how there's so many data sets out there online, and each of them have their own flaws, they have their own biases. And so like having things be mainstreamed, like be like the New York government taking control and like doing the air pollution for the entire city. Like there's so many different online sources and like all kind of are convoluted. So I think that would be the benefit. Yeah.
Now that you've spent a fair bit of time with the different parts of the ecosystem, come to the conclusion that it's all messed up. Is there a path that, when you think about your own path on this, is there a particular part of the ecosystem where you think you could be, or someone could be more impactful than others?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The question was, since I think that there are it's very messy and convoluted, especially in the ecosystem of like these laws and these policies, in the environment. What do I think is the path forward? And I think this was really informative for me because personally, I'm a junior. So I've been thinking a lot about like, what am I going to major in college, which I feel like is a pretty normal thing to be thinking about right now. And at the beginning of this year, I was kind of like, do I want to major in science or policy? And those were kind of the two things that I've always been really interested in. Similar to a lot of people, I feel like there's so much pressure to pick one. So for me, it's always been both. And this project really made me want to major in environmental law and environmental policy because I think that there is no way to make this system better by operating within it. Like, I honestly don't think we are going to get very far by trying to pass new laws in this system. I don't think that most laws we pass in New York City are going anywhere. And obviously some are, like the Composting Act recently went really far and and there's going to be a lot more composting in the city in the next 2 years, but the majority aren't. And so like, for me, at least, I want a career that can change the systems, which makes me really interested in going to law school and figuring out like a better overall system and like taking that onto a larger scale. Like we see a lot of like the larger scale politics not working, like the Electoral College, like the Senate being very outdated systems. And so like, this made me really interested in more systemic change rather than like the work with nonprofits that I've done in the past. So she mentioned I've been an intern with the Plastic Pollution Coalition. I've done a lot with nonprofits from Fieldston. And like, honestly, like this made me want to like pull myself away from nonprofits and more into that systemic change.